Grief doesn't always announce itself the way we expect it to. Sometimes it's loud and overwhelming. Sometimes it's quiet, a dull ache you carry in the background of your life. We tend to think of grief as something tied only to death, but we grieve so much more than that. We grieve people we've lost, to distance, to change, to endings we didn't choose. We grieve futures we imagined, versions of ourselves we used to be, lives we thought we were building. And a lot of the time, we don't give ourselves permission to name that grief or to take up space with it. Grief is one of the most universal human experiences and one of the least talked about. So let's talk about it. Welcome back to Sweet and Sour Sessions. I'm your host and deeply feeling human, Erin. If you're new here, I'm really glad you found your way to us. And if you've been here for a while, thank you for continuing to show up, for yourself and for these conversations. This podcast has always been a space to talk about the parts of being human that we don't always give ourselves permission to explore out loud. The feelings we rush past, the experiences we try to make sense of quietly. Today's episode won't be any different. It's a gentle one, but it's also a heavy one. Today we're talking about grief. So before we begin, I just want to say this. Take what you need from this episode. Pause it if you need to. Come back to it later if today just isn't the day. There's no right way to listen to this. Grief is one of those emotions most of us will encounter whether we want to or not. And yet, it's also one of the emotions we talk about the least. Maybe because it's heavy. Maybe because it's uncomfortable. Maybe because when we witness grief in someone else, it stirs something inside of us that we don't know how to sit with. Today, I want to talk about grief. Not just the kind that we associate with death, but the many different ways grief shows up throughout our lives. Because grief isn't just one thing, and it isn't rare. It's woven into the human experience. And I want to be clear, this episode is not about fixing grief or getting over it. It's about making space for it. About witnessing it, about understanding it as something meaningful, not something broken. Most of us are familiar with the grief that comes from losing a loved one. That kind of grief can feel immense, consuming, like it changes the shape of who you are. It leaves an imprint. And yet, even that grief is something that we often struggle to talk about. There's discomfort around it. People don't know what to say, and they worry about saying the wrong thing. So they try to make it better, or quieter, or shorter. But grief doesn't need to be fixed. Sometimes grief just needs a witness. What most people need in grief isn't advice or silver linings. It's a safe place to feel what they feel, without being rushed, corrected, or minimized. One of the most harmful ideas we've attached to grief is that there's an acceptable amount of time you're allowed to feel it, that eventually you should be past it. But grief doesn't work that way. Grief is lasting. It moves like waves. It comes and it goes. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it knocks the wind out of you when you least expect it. Something that I learned recently, though, is that grief can also be beautiful. I saw an interview with actor Andrew Garfield where he talked about losing his mom. And he said that he loved talking about her and about the grief, which, as he said, was all of the unexpressed love, the grief that will remain with us until we pass because we never get enough time with each other, no matter if someone is 15, 60, or 99. And later he said, "So I hope this grief stays with me because it's all of the unexpressed love I didn't get to tell her." That reframed grief for me. Because grief is love. It exists because love existed first. And when the person, the pet, or the dream is gone, that love doesn't disappear. Grief becomes one of the ways it continues. Something I wish more people understood is that there's no right or wrong way to grieve. Grief won't look the same for every person, and grief won't look the same for you every time you experience it. Sometimes you'll tell stories and you'll laugh and you'll smile. Other times, on a perfectly ordinary day, the grief will hit, sharp and sudden, and it will feel like you're experiencing the loss all over again. Sometimes grief becomes a quiet, constant ache. You're able to live, you're able to move forward, but you're always aware that something is missing, something that should be there and isn't. All of it is valid. Grief also shows up in so many ways beyond death. We grieve the life that we thought we would live. We grieve the goals and the dreams that didn't come true. We grieve friendships that end, losses that can feel just as devastating as romantic breakups, yet are rarely given the same language or permission. Friendship loss is especially hard because no one prepares you for it. We anticipate breakups. We understand that death will eventually come, but losing someone without that context, that knew you deeply, who shared seasons of life with you, that can break your heart. We grieve versions of ourselves that no longer exist. The person we used to be, the person we thought we would become, the version of ourselves we wish we could go back to but can't. We grieve when life takes an unexpected turn and we realize things are not going to look the way that we planned. There's also grief that comes from having no control, from watching the world unfold in painful ways and feeling helpless, uncertain, and overwhelmed. That loss of control carries its own kind of mourning. Personally, I've experienced many forms of grief. I've lost myself more than once. I've grieved for who I thought I wanted to be and never became. For who I used to be in different seasons of life when I was naive and blissfully unaware. I've grieved plans that didn't unfold the way I imagined. Lives I worked toward that didn't come true. There's a particular ache that comes when you realize something you were building isn't going where you thought it would. It's not just disappointment, it's loss. I've experienced that loss in my past relationships, not just from them ending, but during the relationships as well. I've grieved the end of friendships that felt like breakups, losses that were surprising and deeply painful. And while I haven't grieved pets yet, I almost have anticipatory grief when I look at my dog Amari. Losing a pet is a grief that is often underestimated, but no less real. Loving something so purely and then losing it leaves a unique kind of emptiness. Grief is more than just sadness. It can feel like despair, like regret, like uncertainty. And underneath all of it, grief feels like the loss of something bigger than yourself. And that's what makes it so hard to carry. But it's also what makes it meaningful. Our ability to grieve is proof of our ability to love. And that is beautiful and powerful and brave. What amazes me is that we move through life knowing grief will come, and we choose to love anyway. We open our hearts, we build relationships, we dream, we attach, even knowing there will be loss. We do it anyway, usually in the name of love. That's incredible. My hope in talking about all of this is that you know you are not alone in any grief that you're carrying. That you feel safe and supported enough to express it, however it shows up, whenever it shows up. My hope is that you give yourself grace as you navigate the minefield that is grieving, and that we offer that same grace to one another, learning to be witnesses instead of fixers. If you are grieving, I hope you know how brave you are and how proud I am of you for choosing love anyway. That choice to love, even knowing there will be loss, is what makes us human. And it is enough. Thank you for joining me today for this gentle but meaningful topic. If this episode resonated with you, if you know someone who may be silently carrying the weight of grief, please share this with them so they know they don't hold that weight alone. As always, I'm your host, Erin, and I'm so grateful to help witness these difficult but beautiful aspects of life with you. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.